February 2016. In a single minute, nearly $500 million almost disappeared from a nation's central bank, without a single gun, mask, or fingerprint. No alarms, no sirens, no witnesses. But who could execute a heist so perfect? It didn't even need a human inside the building. How did a group of hackers, sitting thousands of miles away, come within seconds of stealing more money than most countries have in reserve? And why did a single spelling mistake bring the entire operation crashing down? This is the story of the Bangladesh bank heist, the cyberattack that exposed the fragility of the global financial system, and a warning that still echoes today. To understand how the heist unfolded, you need to understand the system they targeted, SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, the secure messaging backbone used by over 11,000 financial institutions across the globe, moving trillions of dollars every single day. SWIFT isn't a bank. It's the language banks speak to each other. When money moves between countries, SWIFT carries the message. And for decades, it was considered virtually impenetrable. Bangladesh Bank, the Central Bank of Bangladesh, maintained over $2 billion inside its account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. A reserve meant to stabilize the nation's economy, to weather crises, to protect millions of people. It was protected by SWIFT, protected by the Federal Reserve, protected by a system believed to be nearly unhackable. But here's what the world didn't know. Bangladesh Bank's cybersecurity was a disaster waiting to happen. No firewall separated the SWIFT terminals from the rest of the bank's network. $10 network switches connected critical systems. Outdated personal computers ran software that hadn't been updated in years. And the SWIFT terminal, the gateway to billions of dollars, was connected directly to the general network, accessible to anyone who could breach the perimeter. For years, security warnings piled up. Audits recommended upgrades. Experts flagged vulnerabilities. But nothing happened. And somewhere, possibly in China, Malaysia, or Pyongyang, keyboards began to click. Someone was watching, studying, planning. And they had all the time in the world. The first sign of danger didn't look dangerous at all. A simple phishing email. The kind that arrives in inboxes every day. A link, a document, a request that seems legitimate enough. One employee clicked, and just like that, the attackers were inside. They didn't rush, they didn't smash and grab. They moved like ghosts through the network, leaving barely a trace. And over the next weeks, possibly months, the hackers studied the bank's behavior like scientists conducting an experiment. They watched when employees logged in. They observed how transactions were authorized. They mapped the network, identified the vulnerabilities, and learned the rhythms of the institution. They waited. They mapped. They prepared. Then they spotted the perfect moment. A weekend in Bangladesh, a holiday across Asia, the Chinese New Year approaching, when banks and businesses would be closed, when responses would be delayed, when the window of opportunity would be widest. The countdown had begun. The hackers weren't amateurs. This wasn't some opportunistic cybercrime. This was a military-grade operation. They deployed custom malware, sophisticated, targeted, and disturbingly familiar. Forensic analysts would later identify code signatures identical to tools used in the 2014 Sony Pictures hack. The same patterns, the same techniques, the same digital fingerprints. A signature of the Lazarus Group, North Korea's elite cyber unit. The malware did exactly what it was designed to do. It logged keystrokes, capturing every username and password typed into the system. It surveilled transactions, learning the format and language of legitimate SWIFT messages. It stole credentials, giving the hackers the ability to impersonate authorized bank employees. And then it did something brilliant. It modified the Alliance Access software, the interface Bangladesh Bank used to interact with SWIFT. The malware altered a single system file, disabling the automatic printing of transaction confirmations. The printer, the one physical device that would immediately expose unauthorized transfers, simply stopped working. No error message, no obvious malfunction, just silence. The trap was set, the stage was prepared, and the attackers had everything they needed to execute the perfect crime. All they had to do now was wait for the right moment to strike. February 4th, 2016. 8:36 p.m. local time in Dhaka. In Bangladesh, it was Thursday evening, part of the weekend in a country where the workweek runs Sunday through Thursday. In New York, it was morning, but with Chinese New Year approaching, many institutions across Asia were preparing to close for the holiday. The timing was perfect, and the attack began. 35 transfer requests, each formatted to look exactly like legitimate SWIFT messages, fired from Bangladesh Bank's terminals toward the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The total? $951 million, nearly $1 billion. Almost half of Bangladesh's entire reserve. The requests moved at digital speed, traveling through fiber optic cables at the speed of light, arriving at the New York Fed in milliseconds. First request, approved. $81 million to Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation in the Philippines. Fictitious accounts that had been opened months earlier, dormant and waiting. Second request, approved. Another transfer to the Philippines. Third request, approved. Fourth request, approved. The money began moving. Real money, real accounts, real transfers executed through the most secure banking system on the planet. For several minutes, nothing stopped the attack, but then something unexpected happened. The routing information on one of the transfers raised a red flag. The address included Jupiter Street in Manila, a detail that might have gone unnoticed, except for one bizarre coincidence. Jupiter, the Roman god. The Federal Reserve's anti-fraud systems, programmed to detect unusual patterns, flagged the transfer. Why would a legitimate transaction reference the name of a deity? It was enough to trigger a second look. At the New York Fed, analysts began reviewing the flood of transfer requests. And suddenly, alarm bells started ringing. Something was very, very wrong. 30 more transfers, totaling $850 million, froze mid-flight. But 5 had already slipped through the cracks. The hackers had been meticulous. They had studied every detail, anticipated every obstacle, planned for every contingency. But they made a mistake, one almost too small to notice. One of the transfers, $20 million bound for Sri Lanka, was meant for an account held by the Shalika Foundation, a legitimate non-profit organization. Except the transfer request didn't say foundation, it said foundation, a single letter, a tiny typo. The kind of error that happens when someone is typing quickly, when exhaustion sets in, when human fallibility creeps into even the most carefully planned operation. But in the world of international banking, where billions move on trust and verification, a misspelling is a signal, a warning, a reason to pause. Deutsche Bank, the intermediary processing the transfer to Sri Lanka, noticed the discrepancy. They queried the transaction, asking for verification from Bangladesh Bank. And when the query arrived in Dhaka, it landed in an empty office. Because it was the weekend. Because no one was there to respond. The transfer to Sri Lanka stalled. And at the Federal Reserve in New York, the misspelling, combined with the suspicious routing and the sheer volume of requests, triggered a full stop. Every remaining transfer froze, $850 million, stopped by a spelling mistake and a reference to a Roman god. It should have been a relief. It should have been the moment when disaster was averted, but it was already too late for $81 million. 5 transfers had already been approved. 5 digital messages had already been sent, received, and executed. $20 million headed to Sri Lanka. But thanks to the misspelling and Deutsche Bank's vigilance, that transfer would be reversed within days. The money would come back. But $81 million had landed in the Philippines, in 4 separate accounts at Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation. Accounts that had been opened in May 2015 under fake names. Accounts that had sat dormant for months, waiting for this exact moment. And the moment the money arrived, it began to move. Cash withdrawals. Massive, rapid, coordinated. Money converted from dollars to Philippine pesos. Funds transferred between accounts, layered and split to obscure the trail. And then it entered the casinos. Manila's gambling industry, glittering, glamorous, and remarkably unregulated, became the washing machine for stolen billions. At Solaire Resort and Casino, millions were converted into casino chips. At Midas Casino, more funds flowed through junket operators, intermediaries who facilitate high-stakes gambling for VIP clients, often with minimal scrutiny. The chips were played, cashed out, and converted again. Money moved through shadow networks, through shell companies, through operatives who knew exactly how to exploit the gaps in the Philippines' anti-money laundering laws. At the time, casinos in the Philippines were exempt from mandatory reporting requirements. They didn't have to disclose suspicious transactions. They didn't have to verify the source of funds. They were the perfect laundromat. Back in Dhaka, Bangladesh Bank was still in the dark. The malware had done its job too well. The printer sat silent. The transaction logs showed nothing unusual. It wasn't until February 5th, the next business day, that a bank employee tried to print a routine report and found that the printer wasn't responding. They tried manually. Still nothing. They checked the system. And that's when they saw it. Transaction after transaction. Transfer after transfer. Hundreds of millions of dollars, requested and sent without authorization. By the time they raised the alarm, by the time they contacted the Federal Reserve and RCBC and the authorities in Sri Lanka and the Philippines, most of the money was already gone, washed, laundered, vanished into the global shadow economy. And the masterminds, already covering their tracks, erasing evidence, disappearing back into the digital shadows from which they had emerged. The investigation began immediately. Bangladesh Bank hired forensic firms, first World Informatics, then Mandiant, one of the world's leading cybersecurity companies. The FBI launched an international probe. The Philippine National Bureau of Investigation got involved. SWIFT initiated its own internal review, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. The malware, the code signatures, the techniques, the patterns. Investigators followed the digital trail until one truth became impossible to ignore. The attack matched the fingerprints of North Korea's Lazarus Group, also known as the Guardians of Peace, also known as the Beagle Boys, a state-sponsored hacking collective operating under North Korea's Reconnaissance General Bureau, the regime's primary intelligence agency. The evidence was overwhelming. The malware used in the Bangladesh Bank heist contained code identical to tools used in the 2014 Sony Pictures hack, an attack that had exposed confidential emails, unreleased films, and personal data in retaliation for a comedy film that mocked North Korea's leader. The same group was linked to the 2017 WannaCry ransomware attack, which crippled hospitals, businesses, and government agencies across more than 150 countries. The same IP addresses, the same command and control servers, the same digital signatures. And in 2018, the United States Justice Department took an unprecedented step. They charged Park Jin-hyok, a North Korean programmer working for a front company called Chosun Expo, with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and cybercrimes. Park Jin-hyok wasn't just a hacker. He was part of an international machine built to steal billions of dollars to fund a regime suffocating under economic sanctions. North Korea, isolated, impoverished, cut off from the global financial system, had turned to cybercrime as a lifeline. Estimates suggest the Lazarus Group has stolen over $2 billion since 2015 through bank heists, cryptocurrency theft, and ransomware attacks. The Bangladesh Bank heist wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. Similar attacks had targeted Vietnam's Tien Phong Bank in late 2015, an unsuccessful attempt to steal over $1 million. Ecuador's Banco del Austro lost $12 million in a nearly identical operation in 2015. This was industrial-scale cybercrime, state-sponsored theft executed with military precision. But here's the frustrating truth. Despite the charges, despite the evidence, despite the international cooperation, Park Jin-hyok has never been arrested. He remains in North Korea, beyond the reach of any justice system. And the masterminds behind the operation? The strategists, the planners, the operatives who opened the casino accounts and laundered the money, still out of reach, still unidentified, still, presumably, planning the next attack. The fallout from the heist was immediate and far-reaching. In Bangladesh, the scandal triggered a political earthquake. Atiur Rahman, the governor of Bangladesh Bank, resigned on March 15, 2016, just weeks after the heist was exposed. He was criticized for failing to notify the government immediately, for downplaying the severity of the breach, for presiding over an institution with such catastrophic security failures. His resignation was just the beginning. In the Philippines, investigators zeroed in on Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation and its branch manager, Maya Santos de Guito. In 2023, 7 years after the heist, de Guito was convicted of money laundering and sentenced to 4 to 7 years per count for her role in facilitating the transfers. RCBC itself was fined a record 1 billion Philippine pesos, nearly $20 million, for violating anti-money laundering regulations. Half of that fine was paid by 2016, a rare moment of swift accountability in a case defined by delays and jurisdictional complexity. Casino operator Kim Wong, who had handled $15 million of the stolen funds, returned the money in 2016, claiming he had no knowledge it was stolen. Whether that claim was true remains debatable, but the return marked one of the few victories in the recovery effort. But the impact went far beyond individual convictions and institutional fines. SWIFT, the supposedly secure backbone of global finance, was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Their system had been weaponized. Their protocols had been exploited. And banks around the world were vulnerable. In 2017, SWIFT launched the Customer Security Program, a mandatory framework requiring all member institutions to implement baseline cybersecurity controls, multi-factor authentication, network segmentation, real-time monitoring, mandatory security attestations. These weren't suggestions, they were requirements, and institutions that failed to comply risked being disconnected from the SWIFT network entirely. The heist also triggered reforms in the Philippines. Casinos were brought under anti-money laundering oversight, closing the loophole that had made Manila the perfect destination for washing stolen funds. And around the world, governments and financial institutions began taking cybersecurity seriously in ways they never had before. But what about the money? By 2025, approximately $101 million had been recovered. The full $20 million from Sri Lanka was returned immediately, thanks to the misspelling and Deutsche Bank's intervention. From the $81 million that reached the Philippines, about $66 million has been clawed back through court orders. Frozen assets and the voluntary return from Kim Wong. It's a miracle, considering how quickly the money vanished, considering how thoroughly it was laundered, considering the jurisdictional nightmares involved in recovering funds that crossed multiple borders and passed through dozens of hands. But hundreds of millions remain unaccounted for, lost in the shadows, converted, hidden, spent, funding who knows what operations, in who knows what corners of the world. Bangladesh Bank sued RCBC for the remainder, accusing the Philippine Bank of complicity. RCBC countersued for defamation. The legal battles dragged on for years, complex and bitter. Bangladesh Bank also filed suit against the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, arguing that the Fed had failed in its duty to safeguard their reserves. The Fed denied liability. The courts are still sorting it out, and the ultimate masterminds, still out of reach, still beyond the grasp of international law, because in the world of state-sponsored cybercrime, justice is elusive. Borders protect perpetrators. Sanctions make cooperation impossible. And the hackers who pull off these operations return to the shadows, ready to strike again. This wasn't a robbery, not in the traditional sense. There were no guns, no getaway cars, no physical vault breached in the dead of night. But it was something far more unsettling. It was a warning, a reminder that in the interconnected digital age we live in, money doesn't need a vault to be stolen. Borders don't matter, distance is irrelevant, and the next billion-dollar heist won't come from masked men kicking in doors. It will come from silent keystrokes in countries we may never see, from programmers sitting in Pyongyang or Beijing or Moscow, exploiting vulnerabilities we don't even know exist yet. The Bangladesh Bank heist exposed the fragility of the systems we trust to hold our wealth, to move our money, to keep our economies stable. SWIFT was supposed to be unhackable. The Federal Reserve was supposed to be the ultimate safeguard. And yet, with nothing more than malware and patience, Hackers came within seconds of stealing $1 billion. They failed, not because the defenses were strong, but because they made a spelling mistake. Think about that for a moment. A single typo, a misspelled word. That's what stopped the largest bank heist in history from succeeding completely. Not advanced security systems, not real-time monitoring, not multi-factor authentication. A typo, and that should terrify us. Because the next attack won't make the same mistake. The lessons have been learned, the weaknesses have been identified. The hackers, whether they're working for North Korea, Russia, China, or some other adversary, are smarter now, more careful, more sophisticated, and the systems we rely on are still vulnerable. Banks have upgraded their security. SWIFT has implemented new protocols. Governments have passed new laws. But cybersecurity is an arms race. For every defense, there's a new attack. For every patch, there's a new exploit. The Bangladesh bank heist is a case study, a warning shot, a preview of the future. Because in the modern world, money doesn't need a minute to vanish. It only needs a moment, a single compromised credential. A single click on a malicious link, a single vulnerability in a system that processes trillions of dollars every day. That's all it takes. And somewhere, right now, someone is planning the next heist. Watching, waiting, preparing. The question isn't whether it will happen again. The question is when. And whether, this time, a spelling mistake will be enough to stop it.